This podcast is sponsored by nobody. Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today I will be welcoming back Austin Trunick, who wrote the Canon Film Guide a few years ago, and he's come out recently in the last year with the Canon Film Guide Volume 2, 1985 to 1987. And we're going to talk about that, talk about Canon films that were made at that time. And I'm going to ask him about how, if he knows, how Canon came to merge temporarily with HBO Video to release movies. That is so bizarre to me, how Canon came together with HBO like that. And, it's always been there, a part of my life with VHS tapes I collected and everything, but I'm just curious to know as to how that happened. It's just a little mind-boggling to me. But, there were some great movies during that period of Canon, all the Tobe Hooper stuff, like Life Force, Invaders from Mars, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, all the Charles Bronson and Chuck Norris movies, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, Masters of the Universe, lots of good stuff, and it's going to be another good conversation today. Austin has declared me the hardest working man in the retro podcast scene, and I cherish that compliment, so I'll take it. I really appreciate it. And it's the last day of hot August summer, so let's kick this off right now. So yeah, here is my new interview with Austin Trunick.
Hello.
Hey Austin, welcome back. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Tommy?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks so much for coming back on, and let's get this thing started, shall we?
Sounds great. I'm ready.
Yeah, so getting into the Canon Film Guide Volume 2, 1985 to 1987. Last time we talked was in 2020, and you were working on this volume at the time. Was this a long, drawn-out process compared to writing the first, or was this more of the same?
Well, the way they were published and the order I've been working on is kind of been backwards, especially for the first two volumes. I had been initially writing these books, not setting out to cover every Golden Globus Canon film as I'm doing now, but originally it was going to be just one book about I think it was 50 different Canon movies and the stories behind them. And of course, once I started doing that, I became too interested. I became too obsessed with the Golden Globus, the Canon story, and wanted to expand it. So actually, many of the chapters written for the second book are some of Canon's biggest movies, at least some of their most well-known ones, your Delta Forces, your Invasion USA, your Tobe Hooper movies. Yep. And I had written about those ones early on, actually before some of the chapters in the first volume. So when I set out to write the second one, I was already halfway done with it, really. So both books, the first two books, I was working on them for about 5 years before I found a publisher for the first one. So I had about at least half the book, maybe a little more, the second one written by the time I had a publisher for the first. So I had a great head start.
Wow. I can imagine, because like 1985 to 87, that's really when Canon was probably at its best in terms of, productions getting a little bit better, movies getting a little bit more entertaining and campier and cheesier and stuff like that. So yeah, I can imagine, starting backwards and then going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had really 85 to 87 were the years they had the most money to spend on their films, but also the most respect within the industry. When you have, directors like John Frankenheimer coming in, Franco Zeffirelli, big names and big actors. That's when they could lure in Sylvester Stallone for a film. That's when they could have talks with Al Pacino and Dustin Hoffman and people who would ultimately end up walking away from projects with them. But it was a time when those guys would take their meetings, which was a very short period in their history, because at first they were this sort of they were making these low budget exploitation films, and then after the years, it was kind of Canon fell apart once they were able to spend that sort of money. They weren't able to spend big money on big films for very long.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting dynamic there in trajectory. I think that 1985 is really the year Canon starts to come into their own as far as home video distribution goes as well, because not only did MGM UA Home Video distribute the movies on video, but also Media Home Entertainment did as well. And those were huge sellers when I was a kid. Like, I remember, movies like after Charles Bronson's Death Wish 3, like, Media started distributing his movies. And, like, I remember when I was 19, I lived across the street from a video store that had all of them, but they were the Video Treasures bargain bin reissues from the early 90s.
Right.
Yeah, and I own several of them as well. Did you delve into the research of the home video distribution part?
I do get into it a bit. Yeah, they had MGM distributing a lot of their stuff through the early 80s up through 85 into 86 for some of the, depending on what the films were and who was in them and the bigger titles and such. A lot of those were negotiated pretty far in advance. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The MGM UA home video boxes were bigger and cooler looking on the shelf in your video store than really the other tapes, just physically. But also they had great art design. Those Canon tapes look super cool, many of them. And they used painted art, and that was before, as you mentioned, Media would distribute a lot of their stuff in the years afterwards, and then through Canon Video, where they were smaller boxes. They used a lot of more photography for the artwork, which kind of blended in. It didn't pop from the video shelf and immediately draw your eyes to it like the box for Invasion USA or Death Wish 3 or Revenge of the Ninja would just pull you in.
Right.
Because of their size and the artwork.
Absolutely. They did look really good, the artwork, I have to say. Because something that boggles my mind that I can't believe I didn't bring it up last time was that for about a year, from like 86 to 87, Canon had a VHS distribution deal with HBO, and HBO Canon Video existed. Do you know anything about how that came about?
Yeah, that's a story that I wondered about for a long time before I embarked on this project, because growing up, my video store, there are copies of The Evil Dead and Return of the Living Dead and some other movies that clearly aren't Canon movies, but were released with the HBO Canon little insignia in the top corner. And yeah, so that came about from Canon purchasing Thorn EMI in 1986. Huh. Thorn EMI had that deal in place with HBO, and initially a lot of those movies were HBO Thorn Video. And when Canon bought them as part of the same deal that got them Thorn EMI's British film catalog, their theaters in the UK, and Elstree Studios. This was a huge package deal. They also assumed the role of the partner with HBO. And this being Canon and knowing where they felt they were leaving money on the table, they weren't a company that would if they could sell something, they would find ways. They reissued a lot of those tapes right away, knowing that there was a demand for more copies of all these films out there. Terminator being another great example of something that was released on the HBO Canon label. Right. And that didn't last for long. That was only about a year before they had to start liquidating all these rights to keep the lights on in their headquarters and pay for some of their bigger 1987 productions that were coming out. So there was only about a year that they had that deal. So if you see these movies and you see it with the HBO Canon logo, you know that came out in that video was sold to whatever store picked it up in 86 or early 87.
Yeah, I collect all the Thorn MI video clamshell tapes from my childhood that I rented growing up. And yeah, I mean, like HBO Canon Video, they had all the Orion and TriStar movies, like Back to School, Absolute Beginners, Nothing in Common. But yeah, it just boggles my mind how Canon would temporarily merge with them. I think that Link was probably and I could be wrong about this, probably the only Canon movie that was distributed by HBO Canon Video, or pretty close to it.
Yeah. Gosh, Link. They ended up distributing some movies on video that they didn't distribute theatrically because of that. And one of them, the example that people point to, it always gets lumped in with canon movies, is Highlander, being one. Even though Fox had released it theatrically already, but in between it coming out in theaters and coming out on video, it swaps. The tape would swap out the Fox logo and it would have the Canon logo at the beginning because, again, it was Golden Globus's team at that point that was getting out there and helping sell these videos to stores and in the catalogs and such.
Yeah, Highlander has a little bit of a Canon charm to it, so yeah, I'm not surprised about that. Yeah. Oh, here's something most people don't realize. When Head Office and FX were being prepped for home video, the Canon deal was made with HBO. So the box cover art with those movies is Thorn MI HBO Video, but the logos for HBO Canon Video are played at the beginning to let people know that a change was going to be coming soon.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and I think they did that with Duran Duran's Arena. They had the Thorn MI HBO Video artwork, but they showed the old Thorn MI logo at the beginning, which I'm gonna be buying a copy of it once I can get a good copy on eBay because they've gone up so high now that I'll find out if that's the case. But
yeah, and I know some of those videos, I'm sure I know at least Terminator has collectors who collect every little variant of logo changes and layout changes for the tape. So I'm not surprised if some of those are pretty darn expensive for these variants and that weren't being sold for very long.
Yeah, I got the Terminator, I got Rambo, I got Dawn of the Dead, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So many.
Cool.
Yeah, I got so many, and I got so many more to go, and I want to get them before they're all extinct,
Yeah, absolutely. Before they all end up in, everything's winding up in collectors' hands at this point.
Yeah, and just in oblivion, for that matter.
Yes, that's true. That's absolutely true. I mean, yeah, it's going to be harder and harder to find these out there in flea markets and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, I go to flea markets. I go to Goodwills, all that stuff to collect tapes. That's just my jam.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun.
Yeah. Yes, and also 1985 is when Charles Bronson and Chuck Norris really become the canon action stars. Then they become huge box office commodities. Did Golden Globus try to break more people into becoming action stars for them, or was it that Bronson and Norris were the guys?
Well, Bronson and Norris were both great for canon because they were really known commodities outside of the U.S. So the canon Golden Globus funded so many of their films by pre-selling them, by taking the rights and selling them in every format in every country they could before they actually went and made the movie. They collected the cash from half of the territories in the world. So Bronson, of course, was always good money in Europe, and Chuck Norris was building up towards that level. So they did try to break something. And the person they tried to break out was Michael Dudikoff, who did become kind of their homegrown action star through American Ninja and the next 8 movies that he made for them. But I think it was harder for them to make the huge movies with him because he wasn't a known commodity. It's hard to build your own star,
right,
when you have someone like Chuck Norris or Charles Bronson who theater owners, in Italy or Germany or what have you, they can look back and say, oh, this sold this many tickets for this many weeks, or this tape went out to this many stores, or we could show it this many times on cable. They're willing to pay more for those. So they tried to make plenty of movies with other action stars. The only one they really had any success with, kind of with that same sort of following in the footsteps of Van Damme. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Of Chuck Norris and Charles Bronson is Michael Dudikoff, and then later on, Jean-Claude Van Damme,
right,
who they didn't get to keep for very long because they were really swirling down the drain at that time as far as their expendable cash flow.
Right, I forgot about Dudikoff and Van Damme. You're right, and also too Robert Ginty. He did the
Mhm.
Exterminator movies, and he did Three Kinds of Heat, and I'm sure something else I'm blanking on. And Richard Chamberlain, he did the Alan
Mhm.
Quatermain movies. He wasn't really an action star, but he kind of was with those movies.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. They liked. I mean, they would call it the Canon family. You see it in a lot of their ads. They would, anytime they'd sign someone to one of their multi-picture deals, there would be the 2-page ad in Variety, the headshots as "Welcome so and so to the Canon family," and sometimes they, if they had a really productive Cannes Film Festival, they would have a week later, Variety would have 3 or 4 ads in a row of different people they'd signed deals, and some of those deals never came through, but or never resulted in anything. I think of Linda Evans. They took a bunch of ads with Linda Evans. Um, that's just one of the examples, and they never ended up releasing any film with her.
Yeah, I really love Murphy's Law, and in 2017, I had Kathleen Wilhoit on the podcast, and
Oh, awesome!
I wanted to ask her about Murphy's Law, but I had all these other movies that I wanted to ask her about, and I didn't want to keep her super long because she had just got done teaching an 8-hour acting class, and she was driving from San Diego to L.A. But I'm gonna ask her to come back on soon and see. And find out about Murphy's Law because I think it's her best '80s movie performance. I think.
Oh, she's awesome, and she did Undercover for Canon right after that as well.
Oh yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does the Delta Force hold the record for the longest canon movie? It's 2 hours and 5 minutes, and most canon movies are like 80 to 90, maybe 95 minutes tops.
Right. It's got to be up there. There are, I mean, there it doesn't hold the record because you have movies that were released as miniseries in other countries, but they sold as like a 4-hour long movie. I think like Little Dorrit or The Assaults that had much longer versions overseas. But the Delta Forces, yeah, you pointed out, it is one of the few movies that breaks Menachem Golan's, quote unquote rule that all of his movies all the Canon movies have to be under 95 minutes. And the big reason for that, I think, is because Menachem directed it himself. So he's allowed to bend the rules when the boss is the one making the movie.
Absolutely, yeah. And also, too, Bronson did Murphy's Law instead of Delta Force, and he was originally scheduled to do Delta Force. And I read that there was a poster with the two of them on it. Now, I expected it to be the poster that we know that has Lee Marvin on it, but as it turns out, it was just them. It was just the two guys from other movie sets. It was just like a pre-release poster, pretty much.
Yeah, it was one of those 2-page Variety spreads that they love to purchase, and it's just got the unrelated shots of both of them. But I like the logo, and it's Bronson Norris, and it says you're going to need to build bigger theaters, because they were just promising this movie was going to be so huge, and yeah, that ended up not happening. Yeah, Bronson wasn't necessarily keen on it, and even though the film was originally written for him, towards him being in the Lee Marvin role, but also the pre-sales weren't great enough to justify. Both of those guys were Canon's biggest stars, but they were also the ones that collected the biggest paychecks when they showed up on set. So Canon realized that if Bronson wanted to do something else, they were going to allow it, just because it'd be harder for them to make back their money if they were paying 2 huge star salaries up front.
Yeah, and you have a great supporting cast of great actors that were also names like Robert Forster, Robert Vaughn, George Kennedy, and all those guys.
Yeah, it's a fantastic. There are more Oscar winners in that cast than any other Canon movie, for sure. Not for that movie, but for other things that they had done in the past. But yeah, and then you have Steve James in there on the Delta Force side of things. That movie's, I enjoy the Delta Force, but it is long, and it does feel, I will admit, it feels like 2 different films.
Yes.
Because you get this sort of disaster movie with all these actors that, of course, are famous. I think especially George Kennedy, but for appearing in other disaster films on this kind of ripped from the headlines hostage situation on the plane. And then you have the second half of the movie, which is your much more typical Chuck Norris kicking butt, nonstop action movie. And yeah, it's fun in that way. You really do get two things. And I always like to ask people, like, which aspect of the Delta Force is your favorite? Which do you prefer? Because some people really love the drama with all these great thespians stuck on this plane with Robert Forster terrorizing them, and some people, they just want to see Chuck Norris, Steve James, and Lee Marvin blow things up.
Yeah. It certainly is an interesting movie. My brother had a poster for it when we were kids.
Oh, that's cool.
He had that and Texas Chainsaw Massacre too.
Oh, I am sitting at my office is torn apart as we're talking, but I was reorganizing things and I'm looking at a copy of the Delta Force board game that they produced back
What? I didn't know that they had that.
Yeah, it exists, and I play it probably about once a year with my daughter. My other child's a little young, but he'll get there. But it's fun. It's a kid's game. Yeah, for ages 6 and up, it says on the side of the box, which is amazing for being based on the movie it is. But that was the same time we had Rambo toys, and all the the 80s. The 80s were a fun time to be a kid.
Yeah, I gotta find that because, oh my god, like, I found out that there's so many board games for movies and TV shows back in the day I didn't even know existed because they only lasted like a short run,
Yeah. And they sold all those licenses ahead of time. Delta Force is one of the most merchandised canon movies, and it's kind of funny to think because you don't see this stuff very much because the movie was not. I mean, I think they were looking at it hoping that it would sell tons of toys, and it really didn't. These kind of became spinner rack type things and went to your KBs and your other places that sold the kind of discounted stuff. Like I have also a Delta Force machine gun target set. It's like one of those little like spinner rack type toys from the 80s. It's got a little pellet gun Uzi, and it's a bunch of stand-up terrorist figures that you shoot with the little pellets and try to knock over, and they're all worth different points.
Wow.
But again, that's something they won't sell today.
Yeah.
You won't see that. You won't see that for sale at your grocery store, near the checkout lane.
I can't believe you mentioned KB's. Like, my brother worked there when we were kids, when he was like 16 and I was 7, and like I got discounts on toys and stuff. That was so cool.
Oh yeah. That KB was great. My mom had one back when I was growing up.
Yeah.
That was where your allowance, any money that you could scrape up, it always stretched further.
Yeah.
There than anywhere else.
I rewatched Superman 4: The Quest for Peace recently, and one thing that struck me that I never really noticed is that compared to the first 3, it looks like a pure canon movie. Like, the special effects Warner Brothers provided for the first 3 is like non-existent in 4. It looks very cheesy, and there's recycled footage from other movies and possibly the first 3 as well. I mean, it looks like a canon movie, and I know we talked about this last time about Warner Brothers merging with canon when the Stallone movies were coming out and stuff. So this was that like part of the deal, was to do a Superman movie?
Yeah. Superman was one that they had worked out, and Warner Brothers they didn't quite help as much as they did with Over the Top. Superman 4 is a film that the budget kept shrinking as the shooting dates got closer and closer, and of course they had the entire the effects team from the earlier movies ready to go, ready to work on it, and they had all these great effects scenes, and as Canon kept pulling the budget, more and more of those people kept handing in their notice, walking away from it. And it's a shame because the movie is, I enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah.
And I know that it has its fans, but what could have been, there's actually a great, and this is something that if anybody's looking for, you can always pick up a copy, usually for a few bucks on eBay, but it's like the DC Comics movie special. It's like an oversized adaptation of Superman 4, which actually was released around the time the Superman 4 came out. I think it's like 100 pages or something, but of course it takes a long time to make a comic, and this was based on one of the actual full script, and it gives you an idea because comic books aren't limited by budgets. You can have any crazy special effects you want, but it gives you an idea of what Superman 4 could have looked like had it not been such a dire financial coming at a time when Canon just could not afford to do it any justice. But you get what, basically the complete Superman 4, what could have been. And it's fun to read, but it's also a little heartbreaking because you think, wow, it came from a good place. Like, the money wasn't there to make it such, but this would have been a very fun movie. Like, easily, had they had the cash, I think it would have been stood up there, at least with Superman, the earlier Superman movies. It wouldn't be the forgotten, or like the I wouldn't say the stepchild that they want to forget.
Yeah, I mean, there was stuff that was cut. I know, like I saw on YouTube, like Nuclear Man in that bar scene. Yeah, very rough. I'm glad that stuff exists, and that's thanks to Warner Brothers. They had places to keep deleted scenes and extra film and things like that. Canon, of course, they weren't going to operate on a budget. They weren't going to pay to store deleted scenes and stuff from their films when they could throw it away in a dumpster for free. And that's unfortunately where most of the extra materials, most of the lost scenes from Canon movies went back in the 80s, which is sad. We'll never see that stuff. But thank you, Warner Brothers, back in 1986 for having the foresight to at least hold on to some of those extra scenes. But Canon actually, they even though Superman 4 came out, and by the time it came out, they had no money, and it was, a flop, and Christopher Reeve was not going to go anywhere near him again. Yeah.
They were advertising, they were pre-selling at the American Film Market, at the Cannes Film Festival, a Superman 5. The ads are just the logo with Roman numeral V instead of the 4 at the end, but the plan was to actually use some of that footage that they cut from those scenes you can see on YouTube, with the first Nuclear Man that kind of falls a cloud mantle, it falls apart. But they were going to use that so that they could get Christopher Reeve into Superman 5 and then also replace him with another actor, which is just wild to think, because if you do look at YouTube, and watch those scenes on YouTube, you can see how rough, and they were cut for a reason. Yet Canon was willing to build another sequel around them as like the core of what the movie will be built out of, which is just wild.
Yeah, at that same time, they were also doing Masters of the Universe. Another
big budget movie that did not quite perform to they were hoping it would be their Star Wars. That's something that Menachem Golan used to describe many times in the process. This was going to be Canon's Star Wars, and it was not that.
I know Dolph Lundgren's career was really started to fumble because he did the what's that? Oh, The Punisher for New World Pictures, and New World went under like right in the middle of production.
Yeah, he had bad luck there early on in his career. He definitely did, because he was starring in this, which couldn't be paid for. He was in gosh, I'm blanking on the name now, but the movie that's shot in South Africa and couldn't be released for a long time because, in protest, a lot of they used the military vehicles from South Africa in there, and a lot of distributors then did not want to distribute a movie that was, partially financing the South African military at the time. And then you mentioned Punisher, which had its own production issues. But yeah, Dolph and Masters. I mean, I think he's perfect for He-Man. It's not a perfect He-Man movie, but I think he looks the part. Certainly, you couldn't have built a human being in a lab that was more ready to play He-Man than Dolph Lundgren.
And Frank Langella was convincingly terrifying in that skeleton mask.
Yeah, and he never once in that movie. I mean, he gives a great performance there. He really plays Skeletor like he's playing a Shakespearean, villain, at Stratford upon Avon. He's really, he never once is the part beneath him, and I really have a lot of respect for him for that. because he's a fantastic part of that film. You know, you in his scenes, you really can, you can forget about any of the silly stuff that's happening around him or any of the stuff that doesn't work perfectly, because he is so good.
He's very good. Yeah, he's good at everything he does. I also rewatched Hot Resort recently, and one thing I noticed about that movie is that compared to all the raunchy sex comedies of the '80s, especially in the cannon fodder, it's pretty innocuous compared to a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hot Resort is, it's funny because it is so close to another movie they released at the time, Hot Chili. And it's kind of the premise and the humor and some of the jokes are the same. Cannon's a company that's amazingly, I mean, those movies were very much in the vein of their Lemon Popsicle, their Israeli teen sex comedies. But I just love that Cannon was a company that they were willing to borrow jokes or reuse jokes or actors and really the same kind of parts from Last American Virgin or Hot Chili and Resort, copying from each other. You have, Joe Rubo playing parts in more than one of those films.
I've talked to Joe and Bill Sachs about Hot Chili, and I have a couple ladies scheduled in the future from Hot Resort coming on.
Oh, awesome! Yeah. I am going to be eager to listen to those. I always, anytime I am thinking of somebody or an interview, I'll go on and I'll pull up the YouTube page. I'm like, because Tommy already talked to him. Because I can count on you to ask them about these movies. Which I just love. It's always, I mean, I do consult your show for research.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, you called me the hardest working man in the retro podcast scene, and I'll take that.
I will stand by that. I mean, you talk to so many people that I just love to see these names pop up, and you have so many recurring guests that are people that I love. Obviously with canon interests. I know you've had Catherine Mary Stewart on and had some great chats with her over the years, and
love her
many times, and Lisa London and Jan Gann Boyd and people that Sherry Shattuck that you've had on multiple shows. So I always love it when one of these names pops up on my when I'm checking out my new YouTube video feeds.
Yeah. Did you talk to anybody from Thunder Alley?
Unfortunately, I did not. That was one that I had actually reached out to some people and just never really had any responses. It's something too. There are movies that I had an easier time getting people for the second book because I could point to the first one. Mm-hmm. People could, I think they were willing to take me seriously. Like, oh, they can see this book's on Amazon and I'm using these interviews for something. So I had people who got back to me that did not necessarily answer my emails for the first book. And so it's gotten easier as these have come out and as time has gone on. But yeah, when I was working on Thunder Alley, it was very early on. So I think I was, people had no reason to trust me. I understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm friends with Jill Sholin, and I've talked to Melanie Kinnaman, and that wasn't a really good set from what they told me. There was a lot of patriarchal, just scariness going on in that set, I mean, of all the exploitation actresses I've talked to, they've all said the same thing. There's a reason these are called exploitation movies, and sometimes it's not the best working environment.
Right. Yeah, no, but again, like, I'm glad you're talking to these people, because, if I don't get to, I can live vicariously through listening to your interviews.
Yeah. How about, have you talked to Jill Whitlow for Thunder Run?
No, I haven't written anything about that movie yet, so that's down the road.
Well, it's funny because, she told me, she didn't watch F Troop growing up, so she didn't realize how much of an icon Forrest Tucker was when she worked with him.
Oh, yeah, I love that so many people are willing to share their stories once asked, though. I mean, this is an era that, and you and I both we both love that. I mean, to a certain degree, certain areas and certain films, certain genres, certain studios are going to be taken seriously. But I mean, when it comes to a lot of B movies and exploitation movies, unless they're your horror films or your major action films, they're people aren't going to get these stories if they don't do it now. That's the way I think about it. There's, I mean, a lot of the young actresses were very young. I mean, they're still healthy and kicking and going to be around for a while. Our young starlets, but you get to some of these directors and the guys who've been working on other, in other aspects of the film, stuntmen. I was heartbroken just to learn, this is a little over a week ago now, but that Stephen Lambert, who was a great stunt coordinator for everything from, I mean, he cut his teeth in canon movies, some of his first ones, doing Revenge of the Ninja, Ninja 3, American Ninja. He did Remo Williams, the very famous, Statue of Liberty stunts hanging off the side and being suspended when they've had the scaffolding around the Statue of Liberty. He worked on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Walker, Texas Ranger, all these amazing things. But to learn of his passing, because he's somebody who had incredible stories and somebody who I loved talking to and listening to, and now we lost him. But it's something I'm glad I did, and I'm glad that you are also reaching out to these people who, not just from the 80s but before that. You're doing a good thing, just in the cause of preservation of it's a great cause. I really, really feel strongly that way, that just to get the stories and the recordings and stuff, it's awesome.
I am so friggin' blessed, but I'll tell you, the people that have passed away before I could talk to them, those ones are just devastating to me that I never got to do it. Just most recently, Cindy Williams died. She was scheduled to come on this past spring, and she died in January. That was a real blow to me, I'll tell you.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. One that I'm just was crushed by, and always I feel like my books will always miss it, but was Shabadoo.
Yeah.
I think I had been talking with him in December, before he passed away, and it was one of those things. It's like, we'll talk after the holidays, and he passed away very suddenly and surprisingly. Around New Year's of that year. So it was something that I was like, this is just crushing.
Now, for this book and the first book, who have been your favorite people to interview?
Well, gosh. Yeah, there are a lot of people, a lot of interviews that I really, really love. If I just have to narrow it down and pick just a few. In the second book, just because that one's more recent, someone I absolutely adored speaking to was Wings Hauser.
Oh yeah.
He is a character. The interview is all over the place, covers so many topics. We were talking we were just going to talk about Tough Guys Don't Dance, but of course so many other things come up. That's one of those, but I've always been a fan of his. I mean, you couldn't be somebody who rented cheap movies in the late 80s, early 80s without having favorite Wings House. That's an interview book that I'm like, he skips anything, just skip to that one and read it, because it is wild. He's a wild man. And another one, just another person that I loved in the first book is somebody who passed away not long after I talked to him, but was James Karen.
Oh yeah.
That's one of my favorite interviews. And I knew him from Return of the Living Dead. I was a fan of his from that. We talked about Invaders from Mars, but he's somebody, he was, I think, 93 when we spoke. And he could speak on, he put his acting career aside to go fight in World War II, and he understudied Marlon Brando and the Broadway production of Streetcar Named Desire. And it's just, anytime I get a chance to talk to somebody who's, worked in an earlier era of Hollywood and stuff, it's always amazing. But just somebody who could, had been at it since the 40s and had just a great sense of humor. That's an interview that I'll always cherish getting to have done.
I started going to conventions after him, Clu Gulager, and Don Calfa stopped doing them, and I will always be sad that I never got to go to a con and meet them, because I'm a huge Return of the Living Dead fan.
Oh Oh yeah, that's yeah, Don Calfa. Oh, he would have been so cool to talk to.
Yeah. People told me he was a character too.
Yeah.
You talked to Jan about Assassination.
Yeah. She's also somebody. I mean, she talked to you about too, but like
Oh,
she had befriended Charles
yeah.
and Jill, and so it was nice because she's was able to talk about her friendship. I mean, they really kind of like took her in for a while, sort of as a young actress, and it's cool to hear that side of things because I mean Charles Bronson was very famously kind of a closed off individual, and to know somebody that knows kind of the softer side of him, like I love Jan's insight there.
Did you talk to Judy Aronson?
Yes, Judy's an absolute sweetheart. I love her, and I actually finally got to meet her face to face after talking at a convention. I went down to Chiller earlier this year, so it was finally great to shake hands and actually meet after some only talking on the phone.
Yeah, we did a wonderful interview. I'm one of the few people who's been able to get her on a podcast, and we talked late at night. It was like 9 o'clock at night. It was supposed to be at 8, and then her workout like went over long or something. And we talked for an hour, and it was just so wonderful. It was like two old friends talking. Did you talk to Lorraine Landon about America 3000?
No, she's someone I reached out to and never heard back from, unfortunately. And I think back to the footage of in Electric Boogaloo, the documentary, where she's I can't remember if it's the tape or the script she's trying to burn at the time and having a hard time getting to catch fire. But I did talk to Chuck Wagner about it. So he had some very kind things to say about it. Even though, I mean, and I talked to David Engelbach, the director, and he had some fun stories, and even Bill Wallace, who was the Gruss in the Top Hat, Chuck Wagner's sidekick in that movie. So I got a few interviews. I would have loved to get Lorene, but I didn't have a way of reaching her.
Yeah, she's coming back on next week. It's the 40th anniversary of Hundra, and I can't believe I didn't bring that movie up the first time we talked because that was her first starring role, and she kicks ass. She kicks ass in that movie. And yeah, Chuck Wagner, I reached out to him earlier in the year. I'm going to try again because it's the 40th anniversary of Automan, and I thought that show was so far ahead of its time. It was so cool.
Mm-hmm. It's like, Tron for TV.
Yeah.
The effect. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I didn't even think of it that way. Yeah, Tron for TV. Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, I after her Electric Boogaloo interview, I'd worry if I brought up the America 3000 if that'd be like a walkout moment.
Well, she told me in that first interview that it wasn't her favorite experience, but I can't remember exactly what she told me, but I remember she was very cool talking about it, but she let me know that it wasn't her favorite experience.
Oh yeah, and that's entirely fair. That's a lot of times too. I know when people had bad experiences on a movie, it's something that I'm not going to push too hard to make them rehash those things. There's plenty of stuff that they're happier with or more proud of that they're more than happy to talk to about. So yeah, I'll be eager to listen. You're closing in on 2000, right? We're getting up there with the.
Coming up, it's a little slow now because of the strike going on in Hollywood. And
right.
I've been talking to a lot of musicians and historians and podcasters and former actors, and stuff. But it's coming up on 2000. It's a miracle because I didn't think I was going to do any more than 10 when I first started.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool. Congrats in advance.
Thank you.
You'll hit that in no time.
Thank you. Now, real quick, I want to ask about, when Tobe Hooper was working for Canon, because, he'd come off doing a couple major studio films, The Funhouse and Poltergeist. When he was working for Canon, I mean, did he get a lot more creativity in over there, or was him and Golan, at each other's throat?
Well, I think that's a relationship that started really at a high point and kind of soured as it went on. Life Force was, really he has a great budget. It has one of the longest shooting schedules that Canon actually set ahead of time, and they gave Tobe Hooper a lot of great people. They let him work with a lot of great people, and they kind of let him work at his own pace. And I do think he got a lot of creative freedom on that production. I think once you get into Invaders from Mars, it begins to sour because it's a movie that's taking him a long time. It's going over schedule and over budget. Canon's starting to get frustrated. They're kind of starting to have to say no to some requests. And by the time he got to Texas 2, their relationship was already kind of almost gone. And by the end of Texas 2, they're trying to push him off his own set, and which is it's unfortunate. It wasn't a company where you could often get extra time if you needed it, or more money if you needed it. Even if you were someone like Tobe Hooper that would have actually put it to good use. Mm-hmm. But Canon pre-sold their stuff. Their movies had to be out by certain dates, or they would get fined. And the last thing Canon wants to do is to pay fines to theater chains because they didn't get the movie in and on time. It was something that I think it started out in a really good place. You have interviews with Tobe from, he's usually on the set, and they made these movies really in rapid fire, like one after another over the course of less than 2 years, and where he says very nice things about Golden Globus. And at that point he's eager to work on. He was going to do Spider-Man for them. He was going to do a Pinocchio, a sci-fi Pinocchio with them for starring Lee Marvin. Yeah. Some wild stuff. But yeah, it's unfortunate because I think he's somebody who he would keep at, like, some of these movies. They needed, if he would want more money or more time or something, that he'd need it to kind of work through things. And those are the two things that Canon did not have any to spare, money or time.
Yeah. It's funny. People I've talked to who worked with him on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and people I talked to worked with him on the Cannon films. It's like two different Tobes. Like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre people say he was a real monster, and the people who worked with him on the Cannon films say he was a sweet guy, but he didn't suffer fools.
Yeah, I think those are two different, I think that the Cannon movies, at least Life Force and Texas 2, kind of showed two different ends of the spectrum that Tobe works really well under. Yeah. And one was having a high budget and lots of money and a lot of freedom, and you get something like Life Force, which is a very unique, very amazing looking film. The money that they spent on it certainly goes on screen. You're not paying you've got no big names because you're spending it all on effects and stuff that just looks amazing. And on the other hand, you have Texas 2, which is a movie that Tobe was forced to make fast and cheap. And it's also fantastic because he's really good on working, kind of against, under the gun against a ticking deadline. And those are two different sides I think he worked very brilliantly under. And I think a lot of the problem came during Invaders, which was really neither one of those things. They didn't have the budget and it didn't have the time, and you wanted more of both. So I think I love Texas 2 and I love Life Force. Invaders from Mars has its highlights, but it's not my it is my least favorite of those three, that trilogy he made for Canon.
I'm trying to get Jimmy Hunt on here to talk about both the original Invaders from Mars and the remake. Yeah, him and the kid from Robot Monster are doing a lot of interviews this year and a lot of conventions because it's the 70th anniversary of both of those movies. So I'm trying to get them both.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah,
that's very cool.
And was it Night Terrors the last horror movie for Canon? Yeah,
that was one that became very, very late in the Canon run, and that was one of those ones that they, you didn't think Tobe would ever work for Golan or Globus again, but Globus was able to kind of talk him into it and kind of come in, I think, I think it was on the request of Robert Englund, maybe. But it was something that came very, very late in the canon run, and that was a movie that, I don't think it might have never come to be had Yoram not been able to convince Toby to come work on him for him.
Yeah, I'm surprised that Spontaneous Combustion wasn't a canon film because it's so bad.
Yeah, when we're talking about early '90s canon, that was people ask me what I'm writing about now, and it's like still canon, but it's the direct-to-video era. This was outside of a few things, some sequels and some bigger highlights, your Bloodsport and your Cyborg and things that kind of stand out. This was a period of the period I'm writing about now, which is the last book, the 88 through 94, are, many of these movies didn't get theatrical release. Most of these were direct to video or straight to cable films, and you do get some duds in there, unfortunately. Yeah,
like going bananas.
Right. Going Bananas is in there. You have, just so many movies. You have, but ones that have, you still have Chuck Norris and Michael Dudikoff making movies for them. You do get some kind of like oddball movies that are fun in their own way. You have You're Doing Time on Planet Earth, Charles Mathau, and then you get Rockula, which is a fun, unsung, horror music related film, which people who know it, usually smile when you mention it.
Yeah.
But not as many people know it as other canon movies. Anything else we've discussed earlier in the podcast. That's where I'm kind of at a point too. Like at least this summer I've not been adding too many interviews at the pace I would like, just because, I'll reach out to people and I'll mention if you need to wait till after the strike, I'm fine with that. And so that's a lot of people that, once the strike ends, I think I'll have a little like busy burst for a lot of these people that I will be, hey, remember me? We said we'd do this. A few months ago.
I have a post-strike list of like people that I see on social media picketing that I'm going to reach out to as soon as it's resolved, because I know I'm not going to get them now and stuff.
And that's something too. Like once it gets to that point, you'll have that's something you can talk to them about. That's something that it's a piece of Hollywood history now at this point, when it's by the time it's over, things will have changed, and you'll have people who have those stories from the picket lines and from that side of it. I'm sure that'll be fresh on their minds, and they'll be willing to share those experiences.
Have you ever thought about doing a Canon Films podcast?
Gosh, no. There are people who have done it or are doing it now, or still actively doing it, that I think are doing a good job. I'll be honest with you. Once I've finished this third Canon film guide volume, I'm going to take a break from Canon.
Yeah.
I'm going to write another book that's not Canon related. It'll be a short book. It'll be quick and dirty, but just to jump out of the world. Then I'll probably end up getting into a 21st Century Film Corporation book. People ask that a lot. When I'm doing signings and things like that. Are you going to do something for 21st Century, Menachem's next company? And I was like, I would love to. Yes, I really want to, but I need to take one book off before I do any more at the Go-Go Boys, just for a break, because it'll have been almost 10 years of writing just solid about Golden Globus and the films they made. As much as I love them,
21st Century had the Night of the Living Dead remake, and and Bullseye. I just talked to Sally Kirkland, and I told her that was the first movie I ever saw her in, and she laughed.
The Captain America, that was my that, and the Dolph's Punisher. Those were my Marvel universe. That was my Marvel Cinematic Universe growing up. Howard the Duck. It was a very strange Marvel Cinematic Universe back at 1991. But they're all Marvel movies, and being a comic book fan, I kind of, you didn't have a great choice of Marvel movies at the video store.
No, and there was a Fantastic Four movie that Roger Corman didn't release. Right. Yeah.
I didn't see that. Yeah, I didn't see that till, gosh, I bought that at the Big Apple Con a bootleg in probably 2004 or 2005. My roommate at the time bought it, and that's when I finally saw that.
I talked to Jay Underwood about it last year.
No, that's cool. That's cool. Well, do you have anything fun to say?
Oh, a lot. I couldn't even tell you. It was a long part of the conversation, but he had a lot to say. Yeah.
I'll have to go back to listen to that one.
Yeah, and I mean, like the New World Pictures podcast, is out. And I listen to them, and I've connected them with a few people. I love what they're doing.
Yeah, and if you listen to the Canon, Frank Garcia Hale and Jeff Garlock's podcast.
No, I gotta listen to that.
Yeah, because I've appeared on there a couple times. They're not an interview show. They just cover the movies, but they're very funny. They're both very, very great comic writers, and they're both huge movie fans. We have that tastes, I think, align a lot with ours. They're coming at these movies kind of from the same background, and they fell in love with film at the same time, and in the same sort of aisles in the video store that I'm sure you and I hung out in back in the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great podcast. Definitely should give them a look. That's something that had that not existed, and some of the other guys who have tried to go canon, I couldn't do it better than they could. So that's why I won't do a podcast.
Well, I'll definitely check those guys out, and I thank you so much for coming back on today, Austin. I can't wait till 3 comes out. We'll talk about that when it comes out.
Oh, thank you. It's so good to talk to you. And like I said, I always go and I subscribe, so I see when the new videos come up, and then anytime I have an inkling of wanting to talk to somebody, I always have to go. I'm like, has Tommy talked to him yet? I gotta look.
I appreciate that so much. Yeah, I mean, there's certain people I talk to who don't even do interviews, but I guess my enthusiasm draws them in, and so they want to find out what I'm all about and stuff, But, for the most part, yeah, I mean, I talk to pretty accessible people, and you can always get an interview with a lot of people I talk to. And I thank you so much for that. It really means a lot to me, Austin.
Oh, well, I mean, keep up the great work, and congratulations. I'm sure you'll hit 2,000 well before we speak again. But that's a milestone. So nice work. Congrats.
Thank you so much. You have a great day, and be safe out there.
Hey, you too. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. Austin Trunick. Isn't he a cool dude? Oh, I'm so glad that he listens to my podcast and I give him inspiration. That really means a lot to me. I don't get that very often from people, so I appreciate that I could bring some joy to his life and he can get inspiration to reach out to certain people. I really do. It touches my heart. I'm speechless. I don't know what else to say. Well, until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes.